Hello and welcome to Tech Deal's realistic, real-world 1080p testing using a graphics card that a lot of you will actually buy. Ryzen 7 2700X versus i9-9900K. Does it actually matter about how powerful your CPU is when your graphics card is not top of the line? Now let me back up a second and say I've done numerous benchmark videos between the 2700X and the i9-9900K. When the 9900K launched in October of 2018, these were the two top-end CPUs provided by AMD and Intel. The reason I'm revisiting it is because most of those benchmarks are done with very high-end graphics cards to, quote, remove the graphics card as a limitation and show the pure performance difference between the CPUs. From a pure theory testing point of view, this is actually a valid approach. You want to remove other limitations and simply test how much performance difference there is under ideal conditions between two particular processors. However, many of you don't live in ideal theory testing conditions. You live in something called the real world, where $1,200 video cards are not normal. You live in a world where $200 to $300 video cards are normal. Allow me to present to you the GTX 1660 Super 6GB GDDR6 $230 graphics card. This is a very reasonable, well-priced card that provides good value for the money and will play anything at 1080p high detail today and at least for a while into the future. Not as far as an RTX 2060 will, or 2060 Super, or 2080, or 2080 Ti, but it will certainly do so for at least some time to come, and depending upon your game choice, you may very well get 3 years of 1080p high detail gaming out of a graphics card such as this. The goal for this video is to demonstrate whether or not a top-of-the-line 5 GHz processor truly makes any noticeable or appreciable performance difference versus what is now a mid-range processor, at least in terms of per-core, per-thread performance, as represented by the Ryzen 7 2700X. I know I can hear the internet commenters rushing to their keyboards to leave a comment below and say, "What are you talking about, man? A Ryzen 7 2700X is mid-range?" Well, yeah, actually, if you're talking about new CPU purchases or something in the past year or two, if you're talking about 8-core 16-thread CPUs, yes, it is. This CPU has been available for under $150 multiple times in the past few months. Notably, it was down as low as $135 on Black Friday 2019. I would call that mid-range. Now, in fairness, it wasn't at launch. It was $329 at launch, so it depreciated fairly quickly, unfortunately. In terms of value for the money, if you care about resale value, interestingly enough, the $500 i9-9900K has held its value much better due to the depreciation and value of the 2700X. That's actually an interesting topic that really deserves its own video. If you go back to the original launch processors, the Ryzen 7 1700 in April of 2017, at the time, it actually wasn't even the i7 8700K. It was the i7 7700K 4-core 8-thread CPU, which currently still sells on eBay for about $250. Go look up the price of a Ryzen 7 1700 on eBay, and you'll be lucky to get over $100 for one. So while the Ryzen chips are cheaper, if you do resell your CPUs after a year or two, you might want to take a look at the total cost of ownership of Intel because it costs more up front, but they do tend to retain their value. If you look at the real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner of each screen, you'll see that we are largely graphics card bound. The Intel CPU does have lower overall utilization, although you can't compare frame to frame because I'm doing different things at different times in live gameplay. This is not a built-in benchmark. I'm actually doing real live gameplay over the course of about 20 minutes each in order to see how well they run. The Intel does have slightly lower utilization, but that makes sense because it is a faster processor. Not only is it a faster clock speed at 5 GHz versus the 4.2 of Ryzen, but the Intel CPU also does more work per clock versus the 2700X. Now, that's not true of a 3700X. It is worth noting that Zen 2 closes that gap, and clock for clock, a 3700X is more or less the equal of Intel. Intel has a slight clock speed advantage, but they are roughly equal in terms of per core per clock speed. But the 2700X is a little bit slower, but it doesn't really matter when we're faced with a GTX 1660 Super. Now, there will be moments right here on the screen. If you watch the GPU utilization on the Ryzen, you'll see that there are times where it drops down. We're at 85 to 87% usage. So it is worth noting that in this overhead shot, the Ryzen 7 2700X is bottlenecking a GTX 1660 Super at 1080p high detail. Let me repeat that one more time because I really think this point needs to be made. If you play at 1080p high detail and you want high frame rates, you will find a Ryzen 7 2700X, as great and amazing and powerful as it is, will bottleneck a $230 graphics card, and no matter how much graphics card you buy beyond this, it will not go any faster. A 2060 Super, a 2070 Super, a 2080 Ti would run at more or less the same speed on a Ryzen 7 2700X. Now, I am not saying this is true across all games. I'm showing you one game at the moment. I'll show you Division 2 here in a second. But this is representative of big open world AAA games. You could find this in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Far Cry New Dawn. You could find this, well, you'll see in Division 2 in a second. The upcoming Watch Dogs Legion will be a great example where if you want 144 frames per second, you're going to need more CPU. But let me offer the counterpoint. Before you all think I'm hating on Ryzen here, because I'm not, it's an amazing value, and if you have one, do not watch this video and get upset, because if you want 60 to 100 frames per second, you got it. It's doing it. It just won't do 144, at least not in these types of games, because you are CPU limited. But if you've got a 60 hertz, a 75 hertz, or maybe even a 100 hertz monitor, then you are just fine. But if you want that up to 144 frames per second or beyond, then yes, you need more CPU. And you don't necessarily need Intel. You can go with Ryzen 7 3700X or the later this year upcoming 4700X, and those will do 144 frames per second. Just the 1700X and 2700X won't, because as great as they are and as good of a value as they've become, high frame rate gaming is not their specialty. Now let me turn this entire argument on its head. We are currently testing 1080p high detail. At 1440p or 4K gaming, everything I just said does not apply, because those become much more graphics card bound, and it's not about high frame rates. Not very many of you are trying to play 4K at 144 frames per second. Those monitors exist, but that's still a number of years in the future before our computers catch up to them. An RTX 2070 Super for 1440p high or perhaps ultra detail gaming, or 1440p ultra wide 3440 by 1440p would be completely reasonable on a Ryzen 7 2700X. It would be wasted at 1080p. But as you go up in resolution, you can add more graphics card, and it handles the extra pixels on the screen. It just isn't going to give you higher frame rates. An RTX 2070 Super would be great for an i9-9900K at 1080p high detail if 144 to 240 frames per second was your goal in competitive games. But that sort of graphics card is a complete waste on Ryzen 7 2700X at 1080p. But it is not a complete waste at 1440p, especially 1440p ultra-wide. That would be a very, very nice card. You're still going to be between 60 to 100 frames per second. You'll just be able to run at a higher resolution. Now, in terms of the i9, you probably want to spend a bit more on your card, because if you've got yourself a nice 3440 by 1440p 120 hertz ultra wide panel, well, then you kind of need all the computer that exists, both a high powered CPU and a high powered graphics card. But if you own such a monitor, hopefully you're aware of the fact that you need all the computer in order to handle it. But if you're okay with ultra wide at 60 hertz, then a Ryzen 7 2700X remains a great value for the money. One final point before I show you the benchmark charts. Live gameplay is not built-in benchmarks, and whenever you're doing open world gameplay, doing missions the way you see on the screen here, there will be some variance in performance. If you watch the beginning of the Division 2, the Intel CPU was ahead. As it runs on, you notice the Intel CPU is dropped in frames and the AMD CPU is kicked up, but I'm in different areas of the game doing different things. That's the nature of live gameplay testing. When you are using built-in identical benchmarks, you can certainly look at 3, 5, or 7% performance differences on benchmark charts and say, well, this one is 6% faster than that one, and this one is 3% faster than that one. And you can do that. However, when you're doing live gameplay, anything within about 10% of each other is a tie. And that might sound like a large variance, but you could play the same configuration of hardware 3 times in a row, and you could come up with a 5 to 10% performance difference just because you were doing different things in the game. Now, I am very careful to make sure I don't pull up the map while I'm benchmarking or do other things that like lock the frame rate to 60 or otherwise mess up the performance. I do make an effort in order to make them as fair as possible, but it is not possible to make them equal. We are not just running a built-in benchmark, or we're not even just playing the game, we're playing on live servers. This is a live online game. There are real people you can interact with in this world and play PvP. These are live connected and updated with dynamic content generated from the servers. So it really isn't possible, even if I was in exactly the same area shooting at the same groups of enemies, to be 100% identical, because it does have that online component. It's as close as we could possibly make it. So when you look at the charts I'm about to show you here in a minute, realize that if the numbers are within 10% of each other, then for better or worse, they are the same performance. Starting off with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, the average frame rate was basically identical between the two CPUs because we were limited by the graphics card. However, as I showed you, there are moments and times where the CPU is bottlenecking the 1660 Super on the Ryzen 7 2700X side. We have a lower 1% and 0.1% low because there's various places where the CPU could not keep up. Now, it was blatantly obvious in the scene with the overhead drone shot where you could see that it was sustained at less than 95% graphics card usage. However, that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of little micro stutters in other places throughout the game where you are limited by CPU performance. Let me make another point. Ghost Recon Breakpoint will absolutely totally use all 8 cores of an 8-core CPU. I continue to see people post that there are no games out there that will actually use an 8-core chip. That's utter nonsense. Ghost Recon Breakpoint is 6 months old, and we are just 6 months away from the launch of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, which both have Ryzen 7 3700X CPUs in them. We absolutely not only have games today, but will very quickly have a lot of games that will use 8 cores. So I do think that that is the new minimum in terms of a premium gaming experience. But as you saw here, there are limitations to having an older architecture, such as Zen Plus in this case. Moving on to the Division 2, these numbers are basically equal across the board. Very minor differences. The Ryzen 7 2700X was actually faster in terms of averages, but again, that's where I was at, what I was doing at the time. The 1% and 0.1% lows are a little bit less. These are effectively identical CPUs when it comes to the Division 2, so it very much depends upon what game you're playing. Ghost Recon Breakpoint cares a little bit more, but neither one care terribly when you're so graphics card limited, such as the GTX 1660 Super. I do recommend you buy as much graphics card as you can reasonably afford to future-proof yourself, but as this video demonstrates, buying an i9-9900K to play at 1080p with a $230 graphics card, yeah, pretty much is kind of a waste of money. But wait, there's more! Bonus benchmark time. For those of you who watched all the way to this point in the video, I've got something extra for you. This is a Ryzen 7 2700X, but instead of the GTX 1660 Super, we have an RX 5700 XT. This is a $400 graphics card, roughly equal in performance to an RTX 2070, slightly slower than a 2070 Super, slightly faster than a 2060 Super. It is definitely an upgrade over a GTX 1660. That much is absolutely for sure without any doubt whatsoever. So we should be getting higher frame rates, right? Well, this is 1080p high detail, just like the previous benchmarks you watched. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner with MSI Afterburner, you'll notice that we're about 60 to 70% in terms of graphics card usage. Now, we're in the overhead drone shot right here, just like we were earlier where it was being limited, so it's kind of sort of the same thing and kind of sort of the same area. This was a much longer replay. I'm not going to show you 10 minutes of this because it would carry it. You get the point already. At 1080p high detail, the RX 5700 XT, at least with the Ryzen 7 2700X, is kind of wasted. Now, going forward, it probably will be used by future games more, or if you increase the resolution or increase the detail. We're at high detail. If you run at Ultra, if you run at 1440p, it would not be wasted, and you absolutely would want this level of graphics performance to play at a higher resolution or higher detail setting. Or, if you want higher frame rates, you need a faster CPU, which in this case I'd recommend a Ryzen 7 3700X, or better yet, a Ryzen 9 3900X 12 cores to future-proof yourself. But at 1080p high detail, yeah, this is really not an ideal combination. 85 frames per second average versus 87. This is a $230 graphics card versus a $400 graphics card. We're completely CPU bottlenecked. The Ryzen 7 2700X just will not go any faster than this. Doesn't matter how much graphics performance you throw at it, this is all you're going to get. Notice the 1% low was right at 60 for both, and the 0.1% low was also down in the mid-40s. But this is extremely playable performance. Again, do not let my commentary here dissuade you from either keeping or buying a 2700X if you find one for a great deal. Even in 2020, even with Zen 3 launching soon, if you find a 2700X for $125, sure, you can absolutely build a machine around it. Just don't overbuy your graphics card to go along with it if you're playing at 1080p, because you're not going to get much out of it. But we've got 85 frames per second average, and we were 60 plus frames per second 99% of the time. So if you play at 1080p high detail on a 60 hertz monitor, the performance is great. It's a wonderful experience, and I wholeheartedly recommend it if you buy an appropriate graphics card. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, links to all the products I mentioned to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay, especially potentially for a used 2700X, will be down in the video description below. Those are affiliate links. Shopping with those links, whenever you're buying something, whatever it may be, supports the channel at no extra cost to you. We receive commissions when you use them, and that helps us bring even more content to you. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. You can directly support the channel in several ways. First of all, watching, liking, and subscribing to the channel are completely free and are a great way to support us. The more of you watching the videos, the more of you who share these videos with other people on Reddit or social media or other places, it just helps expand the channel, and it genuinely is appreciated. Thank you. If you can monetarily support the channel, please consider doing so using the join button here on YouTube, on Patreon, Floatplane, or Twitch. Links to all those down in the video description below. There's support options from just $2 a month and up. We have an exclusive Tech Deals Discord down there with private chat channels for those who are able to support at the $2 level or higher. There are some additional benefits, including exclusive videos at the $5 level and higher. Check those out using one of the links below, or click the join button. It'll bring up a page with a bunch of details. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.